bringing out inner beautiful layers, articulation, clarity, tasteful pedaling, breathing texture, tasteful rubato, driven energy, bringing each line to its arrival point and beyond the details, incorporating crisp articulation with overlapped legato imitation of singing, just like on the piano one can evoke possible lyrics through the gestures of the interval in a sound painting of a soundscape that the composer imagined symphonically, eventually operatically, through the piano, while for the piano, forte, contrasts, levels of density of pulse, of breathing for the tension release, or the construction further of the release to go to a next release after the tension. In other words, dissonance and consonance in a narrative statement that keeps the listener in their imaginarium, like as if they explore what they individually imagine, while the music vehicles through the performer's sensitive membrane the notated elements which are supposed to suggest for us the intent of the composer. And sometimes these notations can be a filter that can lead to dead end. Why a grace note unmeasured? Why a super measured group of notes that could have been grace notes? Why the composer chooses to give freedom to the performer here, and apparently on the paper more strict obedience to little details which are so micromanaged that they're not audible with the acoustics and the pedal, though the pedal sometimes is the problem too, because the instrument's evolving its length of holding too. And of course the middle pedal is not used in the 19th century, but the composers imagined for them, Liszt at the end of his sonata with this lingering flat second degree that in fact evaporates if you change the right foot pedal without it, as he didn't have one to be adding to it as a compartimented holding. Or the right foot pedal in any case is a harmonic pedal for the most left-hand accompaniment, which is harmonic, arpeggiated, chordal, patterned, but nevertheless not melodic singing step motion, where you have repeated notes that are syllables that are changed, that you have to replay within the lifting of the key before the full interruption of the resonance. And if you want a mezzo staccato or mezzo legato, or half tenuto or wet staccato or dry staccato, you have so many shades of articulation as of dynamic ranges from whisperato, mezzo pianissimo, to screamato, or the problem with the piano is that if you scream, then you bang, which is not right, because the sound quality, except if the texture is atonal, percussive, possibly, but in the narrative storytelling of the tonal system based on that tension release, dominant, tonic, subdominant, relative minor, major, leading tone, the expression of moving within, even with modulations, in a maze of paths, and the listener is brought to discover through the player's reading of the intent beyond the notation what comes out, and then you say, oh, I like the interpretation of this, or I like the interpretation of this other one, perhaps because it talks to you more at your level of understanding it. Not everybody has to have the score to listen to the piece. Or can anybody always hear the piece by looking at the score without somebody playing it? Like you read a book in literature if you are alphabetized, so therefore you don't need somebody to read it to you. But if somebody does, the eloquence of the way is also bringing like an actor in a theater, movie, film, or game, or whatever it is, um, becomes the action, becomes the character, becomes a psychological depiction of the storytelling through this character who this actor becomes. So it's a rupture of disbelief, but it's also wanting to be told the story. And within the story, even if there is a form that prevails or a form that is explored in its only series of sequences, like Debussy with sensorial modes as well as moods, pun unintended, or the very organized form where the details blend within the structure, and the chosen note, the specific moment of reaching this modulation, like for instance in the adagio of the 23rd concerto of Mozart for piano, when you enter in relative major, you feel like the sunshine is opening in your heart, and you can say, but as Mademoiselle Boulanger used to say in this case, it's only what the music itself is, a modulation with a common tone between the minor triad and the major triad of F sharp minor and A major, but then it suggests, it hints so many things that you can imagine that it does psychologically. So there is a, I would say, sensorial level to harmonization, regardless if it's functional or just emotional, like in Debussy with parallel chords, or full tone scales without leading tones, therefore, or totally disconnected from any organization of the preceding system from Baroque to modern, that was the tonal organization, into atonal, post-tonal, microtonal, serial, or which type of serial, and therefore you rethink the alphabet to state something that you state because your expression to state it needs diphthongs and alphabets which don't exist. So you have to rethink the whole universe in order to create within a planet that has that life that you bring and that becomes meaningful, like a novel for a reader's imagination, like an opera or a film or a video game or any form of storytelling, through a form or without a form, predictable or surprising or revolutionizing it. Schubert, Mozart didn't revolutionize the form. Beethoven, Stravinsky did. What does that bring us to think? That some geniuses need to rethink the status quo, to add a choir to a symphony, which in fact is not a motet with choir and orchestra, then you could say it's an oratorio. No, it's a symphony, but with choir. Why does he need to? Is it just innovation for the sake? Or is it lack of imagination if Schubert or Mozart wrote within the existing forms without expand them or shorten them? I think that's a very important factor for us musicians, pianists, performers, teachers, chamber musicians, orchestra musicians, pedagogical thinking, how we bring to the students the imagination and as well as the strict obedience to the text by understanding, not only by obedience, but obediently nevertheless, to translate the meaning of why this is meaningful to you when you play it, to the point to which it can become so personal and so perhaps peculiar. And when Glenn Gould plays something, you hear Gould playing it, thinking it, more than the piece itself. But I think this subjectivity is very healthy. And it's not true that if you add a rubato in a Chopin piece, you self-serve and you don't serve enough the piece, because the piece is not separated from you. It becomes you. To which extent you immerse yourself or absorb like a sponge all what it means, all its synonymous means, its antonyms, everything. Um, its hints to other pieces, its borrowings, its expected directions. I cannot tell you how much I like to share with you the amount of elements that fire up in the brain of a listener through the soul, the heart, the sensorial experience of a harmonic modulation, of a gestural melodic emotion that comes either with syllables, without, with voice, or imitation on the instrument or group of instruments with the length of decay before the decay, or with the vibrato that sustains, or the organ that doesn't decay. And though the sounds then have to be separated, articulated, breathing, syllabic, spelling, letter by letter, sound by sound, voices that express the vowels, and then articulation to the consonants. And the pianist is, in a way, an indigo for all of that. Almost as if through the piano you suggest an opera, a quartet, a symphony, a song, a poem. Liszt's, Chopin, so many romantic era composers went into that so deeply, Scriabin after them, and Berg, and so on. But even before Beethoven, already with the Sonata Les Adieux, the farewell, all this program music was part of music, even if originally most of it was in Baroque, naturally court and essentially church music. Therefore, the sacred aspect of music was also the same grammar usage of the gestural interval, the ascending sixth, the appoggiatura to the fifth, the perfect intervals like fourth or fifth that are nor major nor minor, the third and the sixth that are major or minor, both or individually. Then you have the modes ascending, descending for the minor, or the harmonic if you have the augmented second, which in fact is for harmonization purposes, but you come from the ancient descending melodic Greek modes on which on the sitar the rhapsodes told the phenomenal mythological stories, and this storytelling is the base of it of all. And when I attend a concert of a student and I hear their reading from their experience with the piece, which is inevitably shorter than the one of the teachers, and then at the same time fresher. And perhaps that's not so true either, because I find that with age, rediscovering the pieces that one has learned keeps their freshness, because they keep questioning you, as if you rediscover more aspects to this embarrassment of riches, of the well of riches, if I may say so, of the beauties or the subtleties of the aspects that perhaps you neglected when you studied it when you were younger, or you replayed it when you were middle-aged. And it seems to, anyway, through the revisitations, reveal itself, so under many different aspects. But in a certain way, it's renewed, perhaps pretend so for some sections, because you cannot ignore that you have already gone through the book. But you reread it with the same pleasure, and you rediscover, like when you rewatch a movie, you start seeing details you didn't see when you were following the action, because once you know where the action is, you can taste other elements. So the detail is not justifying the whole, but the detail can highlight, give a taste, like in cooking an ingredient, and all of a sudden you have a different palate experience of the same meal, and you have sort of a theme and culinary variations with different ingredients or proportions of. And when I hear a student play, when it's a new piece for them, I realize that they are starting on their own journey of life, which I wish them as long as possible to discover themselves through the rediscovery of it, like theater actors with theater plays. And in fact, any human being who is humble enough to think that they have to perfect what they do, either the way they love, the way they do, the way they think, the way they bring, give, receive, share, or protect. From every aspect of life, nothing is achieved. You always have to think, how can I do it better, if not more meaningfully? Or how can I get more to the core of things? Sometimes we're distracted by effects of virtuosity in piano, which are necessary. And I don't think they should be opposed. It's not musicianship versus technique, it's the technique that allows you to play through your muscular memory as well as your structural understanding. So you're your conductor and the orchestra at once. All these are easy concepts to lay out like that when you don't play, but when you do, you have to be the bee on the flower and at the same time over the garden and observe the plants, how they exchange the light of the sun, the drops of the rain, and you go from one to not to another like a bee, and you plan it and you organize it, and some things go autopilot, some things don't function like you expected. Acoustics, instrument, action of the piano, idea that perhaps it's not enough or too much. We all have an idealized sound before we start playing, singing, um, um, thinking, even loud voice compared to the thoughts we had before and what comes out. The more experience, the more you organize your statements according to the purpose of your statement. And you don't get lost in turning in rounds like I do very often, just like now, touching so many points of a essential guideline, which is how do I translate meaningfully what I read to the audience or to the student who will bring it to the audience if I'm the teacher and not directly the performer. And if I'm the composer, how do I expect the performer to read me through my notation to guess my intent for the emotional, structural, and not necessarily opposite, but combined elements which will bring a certain coherence to the listener or a certain fantasy to the listener who will entice the listener to get into their own imagination. And after all, there is a level of pleasure, there is a level of reflection, there is a level of self search, there is a level of inner silence when you listen to music. Not necessarily the entertaining music, but that also. It stimulates senses, it stimulates different aspects of our hormones that make us be alive. And I think that the light and heavy music, the pop and the serious music are a relatively 20th century concept which existed but to a lesser extent in their contrast in the centuries before. You had chansons and songs, you had fugues, but you had also dances, which are even stylized, still coming from the popular dances from a different era and then translated timelessly forward. After all, it's 200, 300 years, some of the pieces we play on different instruments for different years with different concepts of the texture of them, but nevertheless with some kind of a flame of love for the meaning of it for us. And then we become so conductive for the audience because, or for the student, because they see it by example. You don't only organize and say, well, this fingering will make you play this phrasing and this breathing will organize better the structure for the pulse. Yes, that are reflections, experiences, balances between high range and low range, and how to organize the clarity while avoiding dryness, but not succumbing in over wet resonances with pedals, depending of the styles and the textures. And your awareness of what those styles and textures are in different time periods, translated on instruments for which is not written, and how we perceive them or expect them. And you will disappoint some, you will entice some, you will perhaps leave some surprised. But you keep that enthused jubilation, which is not necessarily happiness. It's more about the struggle to mark at your best by your honesty in the service of the muse through the student or the chamber musician partner or the audience member or the conductor in the orchestra or the choir or the composition for these or that elements of instrumentarium. And you feel like, I want every day to be meaningful. Everybody carries inside them something they cannot bring out in a form outside of them that is finalizedly perfect, like Mozart did or Shakespeare did. That's given to few, or Schubert did, or Bach did in music, and many others did. Some struggled apparently so with the sketches that we have from them, and some just directly seem to have heard it as a dictation from some retrieved memory of something which is new while eternal and possibly still having existed. And I find that it's very humbling to discover what a piece of music means to a student, how I expect it as a listener, how I expect it as a listener when I hear a colleague, or how do I expect it as myself playing, to live to the expectations. Perhaps they're too high for my means, but it's always given to us to do something bigger than us in our lifetime through love or giving, translating or transmitting, one way or the other, through example or through concepts, through science, through exact science, or through inspirational psychological emotion that suggests human experience when you identify with anxiety, excitement, hope, despair, experienced by writers from the past, musicians from the past or the present, probably in the future. Even if some of the languages evolve, you can see that a lot of the human aspect of the humanity remains as a constant. And we try to be perfect in our repetitivity to do it well, to produce the best baguette if you're a baker. And you learn how to do it until some come out better than others. And probably the same is for every craftsman, as well as for the industrial designer who will make it produced by the industrialist. But then the way you handle it, because that will give a certain art form in your life. We are in the environment in which we are influenced by everything in our inner world as well, the cultivated evolution of our awareness of things, our misunderstanding of things, sometimes, in all honesty, of the present day as well as from the past, because our lifespan is short and the events seem to be ununderstandable in their evolution through years and centuries, and we tend in history to cover them in chapters like as if they happened in a certain succession that was expected, and in fact in their own time they were perhaps the result of unexpected situations that led to each other, and you always can go, what if? Which is the case also for interpretation. You have it all planned after all the practicing and all the playing and all the awareness of the piece and how you want, as I said in the beginning, to bring out the storytelling, the phrasing, the articulation, the sound, the pedaling, the texture, the mood, the everything. And then it doesn't come out like that. You deal with the unexpected on the moment, perhaps because you're moved by the presence of somebody who hears you, and you're distracted to a certain extent compared to when you practice it in rehearsal before the performance. But it starts living, or the work itself starts living once you share it with others, even if it's a microphone to a certain extent. Not that it's only, well, it can be considered narcissistic, but I still think that somewhere we're doing it for our inner betterment, and through which we try to reach the high standards we apply to ourselves and we expect from others. And sometimes it's easier from others than from ourselves because the humility hurts. But relentlessly, you can bring it back to the craftsman table, the piece, and you say, I'm going to restart it and try to go through the trajectory as I planned it because I think it's the best trajectory for the pulse phrasing. It's almost like a choreography that you plan, but then people dance it. And the humans bring in great beauty in it and sometimes mistakes, which is part of being human. But we try to not want them. Of course, we shouldn't. We should tend to perfection, not for itself, but because the work that we serve means so to us so much that we want not to disappoint ourselves for all these hours of trying to be the best at our craftsmanship, whether it be sculpture, painting, drawing, conceptual, 3D imagery. I mean, whatever it is, our best at it. And never cease to work towards your best at it. So all that said, in fact, it's very humbling because you realize that while you live with the expectation that the next time you'll play it or compose it or improvise it or read it or sight read it or share it in a chamber music sharing or with an audience or with an orchestra and a conductor, at whichever level of synergy or energy of inner drive combined with the outer drive of the others, you place yourself in the tracks of the statement, you have to cherish the quality of the sound, the imagination of the voicing, the layering of the texture, make choices of what is foreground, what is background in the soundscape, how much. You cannot be judging while you do. You have to just let it go from A to Z. You don't stop because, in a way, that's also the meaning of the piece. Not only the detail, but the sum of the details blending in a fusion of words in a sentence or sentences in a paragraph in a chapter. And all the analogies work because, in fact, human beings experience that, conscient or not, awareness that we try to go beyond our mortality. Probably unaware and hopefully so. And not necessarily for thinking that we're so individually indispensable, because we are not, but self-esteem and humility, well, there's a balance inside. And when you see how to try to seek for it, when you're constantly in a barrage of things that you want to improve in order to serve your art at your best, even if some people can tell you, not everybody hears everything in the hall. Sometimes you can cover it up with this pedal or that. Sometimes it's helpful to have options. How you handle it with the hands, or if you take it with one hand or another. Do you make it safe? And is it because it's safe that it's less driven for the way you handle it compared to the music that comes out of it, the dotted rhythm, the shifting, the distance? Cautious is not undriven, and driven is not only messy, but it could. So you have to let go and at the same time control without to strangulate your attention and your muscular and your articulation synergy of piano playing. Yeah, the very word playing is as if it's a game. And that has its positive too, because it's like I'm playing, that means I'm exploring, I'm trying, I'm curious, I want to see how it's going to turn out. I'm sculpting the sounds in a way, imaginarily speaking. I am an archaeologist when I dig a lesser known piece and I want to bring it to life, even if I don't have references by others. Or I play something everybody else plays and I want to play the way it means to me without to be too self serving. At many, all, or some of the levels, we approach ourselves in front of how to deal with this absolute, and we don't want to make compromise. But life brings us to compromise. Sometimes the pieces we serve seem so perfect that we feel like we'll never be at the level of them. But the fun in the sense of struggle, but at the same time, jubilant struggle, that's I would say more than fun, to reach to the quality legato you really want. And I hear sometimes students, they start again after they just started because what comes out is not exactly what they wanted, hoped. And because it's a lesson, they can restart. You cannot do that in concert because by essence you go from beginning to the end. So you accept the unexpected and you deal with it as if it was meant. That comes with experience, but in fact, you never stop digging inside you for not compromising with the idea of the sound that you hear inside you from what you read from the piece, or if you composed it from what you imagined in the piece, and how the reality comes out. And does it match? Does it go further? Are you agreeably surprised, or most of the time disappointed? Oh, I should have, I could have, I didn't want to, but it didn't come out like I wanted, and well, next time. And that's a good thing to think. Because if not, we'll be desperate. But on the spot, I think you live fully the opportunity to touch closely by your own means and artwork. It's not like as if you're gonna paint the Mona Lisa. You're going to enjoy watching it. But when you play a sonata, you're sort of recomposing it, even if it's already composed, but you bring it back to life from the paper or from the notated text, today tablets. And the teacher, it helps you decode what are the notational sort of filters beyond which we can guess. Different people differently guess what was the intent for this or that phrasing or delays of a note or a chord, or how you match their harmonization with the melody. I find it fascinating because in fact it proves only one thing, is that you share your capacity with the student and with the audience to be marveled by what the piece or the music that you choose to play or compose brings to you, not only meaning but experience, really experience, the experience of being on earth. After all, that's one of the things that makes us equal among the unequalness from birth that are given to us by abilities or means. But nevertheless, we are brothers and sisters in human travel through life, which I wish you all to be the most fruitful, rewarding, and jubilant, even if it's a struggle, and even or because it's a struggle. No moralism there, just hard hope. Thank you.